Hi, welcome to this Excel tutorial video, and today I'm going to do a video on an introduction to the Xlookup function and also how Xlookup and Vlookup differ. Now the Xlookup function, there's a lot of options in this. I'm not going to cover everything in this tutorial. This is just an introduction to it. We'll just do a comparison between Vlookup and Xlookup on the kind of more basic uses. So let's begin by talking about VLOOKUP. I have already done a couple of videos on VLOOKUP and I'll put links to those in the description of this one, but essentially VLOOKUP allows you to search for a particular value in a separate set of data and return data from different columns based on it finding a match to your search criteria. So if I do an example here, let's say I want to return the invoice date amount. Well, you can see the columns here based on an invoice number, and I'm going to look here on the left hand side at this invoice number column and return the data. So what I can do with VLOOKUP is I can say equals VLOOKUP. The first required value is what I want to look up, and in this case it's going to be my invoice number in this cell here. Then I say where am I going to look, and this is kind of where VLOOKUP differs to XLOOKUP. So with VLOOKUP you say I want to look in this column for a match, but then you've got to give provide extra columns for depending on the data you want to return. So in this one I want to return the invoice date, so I can say I want to look here, but because I want to return the invoice date I must include the invoice date as part of my array. So I'm going to look at columns B and C. Using VLOOKUP, the leftmost column has got to be the column that you are doing your search, your match on, and any columns to the right can be returned. So my range is going to be columns B and C. Then I've got to say which column I want to return data from. And this is numeric, so I can't say C. In this case, I've highlighted two columns, and it's the second column that I want to return data from. And the final thing is whether I want to do an approximate match or an exact match. And generally, you'll want to do an exact match because with these kind of lookups, you want to return a value if you find a match in another set of data. But by default, it says approximate match, which isn't really very helpful, because if I've got an invoice number that is INV001 and then another number, it's going to potentially get confused because INV001 might exist in more than one place if it does kind of a, if it's just searching for that within an invoice number. So here you would choose false to say I want an exact match. And then that's the end of that. And you press enter and it returns that date. And if I come to here and I do equals VLOOKUP again I want to use this invoice number. And then it says which array. Now I'm trying to get the amount here, so I'm going to go all the way across to the amount. So now I've got three columns highlighted. It's column 3 that I want to return, and again false. Or I can put 0 as a binary true or false equivalent, and it returns 115, which is correct. And then I say to missing, and I can continue doing this with the remaining columns. So, and finally, I'll do this one. All the way to paid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so that's fine. Now I have a problem. I want to return customer. I can't return customer because of the logic of the VLOOKUP. The value that I can return has got to be to the right of the column where I do my search. The customer name here is to the left of that column. So using VLOOKUP, it is impossible for me to return that data. So that's where now the VLOOKUP stops being helpful. So let's look now at XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP has a few extra parameters. The first 3 are required, the next 3 are not. So let us just begin with a nice simple example. It kind of works in a very similar way. So I want to look at for this. That's my first value that I need to put in. What am I looking for? That. Where am I looking? Now this is where it gets ever so slightly different. So where I'm looking is in this column here. Then it says, what column do you want to return? Okay, so in this case, I want to return that column. That's nice. Then I've got an option of if 3 optional values. What if we don't find it? Well, I can put something in there saying, and it'll return something, not found. I'm going to forget about the next 2 just for this second. So that's pretty good. I can do, I could do the same thing here. I'll just do another quick lookup. And before I show you a really, really cool thing. So H3, I'm looking in here. And if it's not found, well, just put an empty string. 550. So there's my values. Now what's cool is, well, in fact, before I go to what's cool, what it allows me to do is I can put the customer in. So if I do an Xlookup for this, I'm going to look here, and I'm going to look to the column to the left, and that's fine. It accepts that. ABC limited. So now using Xlookup, I can go to a column to the left of the column I'm searching. But what you can also do is you can say, right, okay, I want to do an Xlookup. I want to look up that. Where you're looking here. What's your return array? Well, let's say I want to return invoice date, amount, outstanding and paid, because they are the next columns I've got. If I highlight all of those, it puts them all in. So you see when I've highlighted that, it's got this kind of line around those 4 cells because they've all been returned based on the Vlookup in I4. And you see the formula here, if I were to move to the right, that formula is still there, but you can see it's grayed out as opposed to being, the standard font color there, but it's grayed out when I go this side because the formula is not actually in these cells. The formula is in this cell and it's affecting those cells to its right. So that's pretty cool. It is just returning the values to the right. It doesn't matter about what I've got here. It is returning those values to the right. So, but it is, if it's all in the same order, then that's really, really cool. And you can then get this from here. Like I did before. Oops. So let's just finish this off. Look in here, return in here. And then like with anything, you can just drag that down and there's all of my data. Nice. Now then, let's move across here a little bit. Let me just make this a little bit now over here. So let's move across to here. Another option within Xlookup that I want to show in this tutorial is we've got 5 customers here. There's the 5 customers here. What I want to know is the first invoice that is that is in the list for that customer and the latest invoice in the list for that customer. So what we can do is we can say, okay, equals Xlookup. We can choose the customer. We can say, okay, the customer's in AA. And I want to return the invoice number in column B. Now I've got options again. What if it's not found? Well, I'll just say empty string. Match mode. Now this is something I haven't looked at yet. So the match mode is the same as the Vlookup, where you can say an exact match or a wildcard match. There are other options as well, which I'll talk about in a more in-depth tutorial. But what's good about Xlookup is, by default, an exact match is selected, and that's generally what you'd want by default. So Vlookup, you have to select an exact match because the wildcard match is by default. In an Xlookup, the exact match is by default, and that makes more sense. So I don't need to put anything there. I can just put a comma. I can ignore that, or I can, just put 0 for exact match. It's this last one that I want to show you. So this last one, we've got a couple of options here, and the first two options I'm going to demonstrate. So we've got this search first to last or search last to first. So what it's going to do is it's going to look down that list of invoices and it's going to find the first match for ABC Limited if I select 1 as my value. And sure enough, ABC Limited, the first invoice is invoice 2. But if I were to, let me just copy that, and I'm just going to paste it in here and change that value to be -1, which is last to first, we get invoice 13. And ABC Limited, the latest invoice is invoice 13. And if I were to drag this down here, we should see that for test customer 1, the first invoice is invoice 1, and their most latest invoice is invoice 15, and you can see that. And now you've got these values, you can then, have more columns here based on the values of those invoices doing the other lookups that we've looked at already. That's the end of this tutorial. I hope that was helpful. I hope there was something on there that was new and something that you learned from it. Any questions or queries, please drop me a message. Thanks for your time. See you next time.